All right, guys. Last section of notes, we talked about the early stages of the Civil War. Talked about both sides, the advantages, disadvantages of both, and kind of talked about the very early beginnings of the Civil War. And we're going to continue with the early part of the war here in section 2. We're going to talk about the early years, really from 1861 to around 1863, and we'll talk about just some of the things that went on during that part of the war as we go through here in section 2. Okay. If you remember from section 1, we talked about the plans for both sides, the strategies. One of the strategies for the North was to you take what was called the Anaconda Plan by Winfield Scott and attempt to put that into play so that they could win this war a lot more quickly. So when the war starts, Lincoln announces a blockade of all southern ports. So they take the U.S. Navy, they send their ships out to sea, and they'll blockade all of the major southern ports. They want to make sure that cotton is kept from being exported out of the country to places like Great Britain and France and other places. And they want to make sure that war materials are not being sent in to the southern states from some of these other countries. And so that was one of the main goals of this southern blockade, is to keep cotton from going out and ammunition and weapons and things from coming in to help support the South. We'll talk about how the South, here in just a little bit, about how the South kind of tried to get past that blockade. So we'll get to that here in just a minute. I didn't know this was all going to pop up at one time, but that's okay. We'll just go from here. In 1861, tensions are going to mount, and that's going to lead to the first major battle of the Civil War. That's going to be in Virginia, near a place called Manassas, Virginia. And when we talk about these battles, you'll see that all the battles will have two different names. Okay, both sides called the battles two different things because they didn't want to be like the other side. So when it came to the South, when they named battles, since they were more agricultural, more country, they tended to call the battles name them after natural features. Okay, so when it came to this battle, they called it the Battle of Bull Run. Well, for the North, they oftentimes named battles after man-made structures. So in this instance, the city of Manassas, Virginia, so they called it the Battle of Manassas. And we'll see as we go through here the different names that are given to these battles and why, and that's why they're called two different things, because the South called them one thing and the North called them another. Okay. But when it came to the Battle of Bull Run, and I'll say this is the first Battle of Bull Run, there will be a second we'll talk about later. In July of 1861, you've got the Union general, Irvin McDowell, and I think I have a picture of him. There he is. He'll take about 30,000 troops, and he's going to attack the Confederates, led by P.G.T. Beauregard and his 20,000 troops. Remember, we talked in section 1 that nobody thought the Civil War was going to be as big a deal as it was. They thought it would end very quickly. They didn't think the South could hold out long enough. The South didn't think the North could continuously attack them and be the aggressor. So they don't think at this point they still don't know how big of a deal this Civil War is going to become. Okay, when it came to this battle, Irvin McDowell is going to attack Beauregard and his troops here at Manassas. Well, hundreds of spectators have come from Washington, D.C. to basically picnic and watch this battle as it unfolds. They don't think it's going to be a big deal. They think the Union Army will just crush the Confederates very quickly. And so they've come out to just make a day of it. When the early goings, McDowell does have a lot of success. He will attack the Confederates, push them back. Well, then Beauregard, him and his troops are gonna launch a counteroffensive. Means they kind of hold their ground, and now they're going to go on the offensive against the Union Army. And that all happens because a man named Thomas Jackson, who was a great military leader for the South, he's going to get his troops to hold their ground. He's going to kind of then go on the offensive. They're going to push the Union Army back into these picnickers. So during the retreat, the Union soldiers are going to run through these civilians, and it's just going to be mass chaos, and people are going to be going everywhere. And after this battle, people are going to realize, you know what, this is going to be a much bigger deal than what we thought. But here at this battle, the Confederate general sees Thomas Jackson and tries to rally his regiment by saying, look at Thomas Jackson over there standing like a stone wall. And that's where Stonewall Jackson gets his nickname for the remainder of the war, or the remainder of his time during the war. He'll be known as Stonewall Jackson and not Thomas Jackson. And it's at this Battle of Bull Run, this first Battle of Bull Run, where he'll receive that nickname. When it came to trying to take over in the West, remember that was another part of the Union's Anaconda Plan. They wanted to take control of the Mississippi. That way they could cut the Confederacy in two. And so that's what they began to do in early 1862. A man by the name of Andrew Foote, who was a Navy leader, and Army Commander Ulysses S. Grant, who we'll talk a whole lot more about. But they're going to kind of go on the offensive in the West, and they're going to end up capturing Fort Henry on, I believe, the Tennessee River, and then they're going to take Fort Donelson on the Cumberland River. And again, the goal is to take these rivers so that the South can't use them. Eventually, take the Mississippi River, cut the Confederacy in two, and make it harder for the South to kind of unite. That's early in 1862. They'll capture those two places, and there's the different some pictures that I put there. In April of 1862, a man named David Farragut, a Union admiral, is going to attack the port of New Orleans. They will capture New Orleans. It will fall to Union hands. So by mid 1862, the only stronghold that the South will have along the Mississippi River is going to be at Vicksburg, Mississippi. Some of you may have traveled down and toured the battlefield at Vicksburg, Mississippi. I've been there once. It's pretty neat. But then shortly into 1863, Vicksburg will fall, and then the Union will control the Mississippi River. That's David Farragut there. All right, like I said, when it came to the blockade, the Southerners hoped to break this Union blockade with a secret weapon. That secret weapon was actually a Union frigate that had been burned and sunk earlier in the war. And they just kind of deserted, the Union soldiers just kind of deserted it. Well, the South, they discover it. They're going to raise it again. They're going to bring it up out of the water, and they're going to kind of redo it to make it a Southern vessel that they can use to hopefully break this Union blockade. Okay, the Union ship was called the Merrimack, the USS Merrimack. Well, after the Confederacy take it and kind of rebuild it, they're going to rename it the CSS Virginia, Confederate States. They're going to rename it the Virginia. Well, how they rebuild it, they basically take it They take off all the burned parts of the ship. They kind of break it down, and then they're going to cover it with very thick iron. It's almost unsinkable, the way that they put this thing together. The Union will eventually create an ironclad of their own called the USS Monitor. But before they can get their ironclad built, the CSS Virginia is going to sail into the Chesapeake Bay and start sinking Union warships. The Union warships will fire on the Virginia, and the cannonballs literally just ricochet off the side. I mean, they can't sink it. They kind of get worried that this ironclad vessel will sink enough Union warships to break this blockade and allow goods in and out of the South. So they're pretty concerned. So like I said, eventually they'll build a ironclad themselves called the USS Monitor. And these two ships are going to meet at what was known as the Battle of Hampton Roads. There's some pictures here of the two different ships. But this one here on the bottom right, that's the CSS Virginia, and then you've got the Monitor over here in the bottom left. But they'll meet at this battle, basically just cannon fire back and forth. Neither ship sinks because they're, like I said, they're pretty much unsinkable. It ends in a draw. Both ships kind of just leave. Both North and South consider it a victory for themselves. But this is going to these ships will really change the way that future Navy vessels are created once they see that these things are pretty much indestructible. You know, obviously you see now the battleships and aircraft carriers and things that we make today. Well, that started with the development of these two ironclad ships during the Civil War. Excuse me. All right, we'll talk about the Battle of Shiloh. This is in Tennessee. We're moving back to the kind of the Western theater here. Ulysses S. Grant is going to attempt to take a popular rail city of Corinth, Tennessee. The South is going to launch a surprise attack on him about 20 miles away at the Battle of Shiloh, which was also known as the Battle of Pittsburgh Landing. So you have Ulysses S. Grant, who has around 65,000 troops. He's really got about 40-something thousand. Another general, General Bell, will come in to kind of resupply him with other troops. He'll bring another 20,000. So when it's all said and done, there's about 65,000 Union troops at the Battle of Shiloh. And you've got Albert Sidney Johnston for the Confederates, who will have around 45,000 troops. Like I said, the Johnston is going to launch a surprise attack on the morning of April 6th of 1862. Before Bell can get his troops to help Grant in this battle, but it's going to end up being a 2-day long battle. There at Shiloh. There's going to be over 23,000 casualties in this 2-day battle. And the casualties, that doesn't mean 23,000 deaths, but that's, killed, wounded, missing in action, whatever, 23,000 during that 2-day span. And at this point in time in history, April 6, 1862, this is the bloodiest battle for the United States up to that point. All the other battles and wars that we fought at this point in time, there's not been another battle in our history where we've had over 23,000 casualties. So here at the Battle of Shiloh, it's going to be a pretty bloody affair for those 2 days. Eventually, Grant and Bell will unite their troops. They'll go on the offensive and push the Confederates back. And then they will eventually head into Corinth and take over Corinth as well and take that city and kind of cut off the rail lines for the Southern railroads. Excuse me. kind of shifting back to war in the East, the Confederates are going to face a whole lot more success when it comes to the battle or the war in the East. And that's mainly because they have Robert E. Lee in charge. Also, Stonewall Jackson. We'll talk about some of the different battles that they'll win in the Eastern Theater. And I say theater, you had the Western Theater, you had the Eastern Theater. When it came to the Civil War, the different regions and to where these battles and where the fighting was actually located. But Robert E. Lee and Stonewall Jackson will have a lot of success when it comes to the war in the East. They're basically going to go on the offensive where they will defeat the Union Army at 3 major battles. They'll defeat 3 different Union generals in doing so, and we'll talk about those. The first one, they'll defeat General McClellan at the 7 Days Battle. Obviously, the 7 Days Battle because it lasted, 7 days. But McClellan will be defeated at the 7 Days Battle. And I'll go back and say at this point, General McClellan is leader of the Army of the Potomac, the Army of the Potomac, which was the major Union army at that time. So McClellan is the leader of that army. We'll talk more about him here in just a minute. But Lee and Jackson will defeat him at the 7 Days Battle. They'll then push on where they will head into Virginia or go into Virginia. All these battles will be in Virginia, but they'll defeat General John Pope at the Second Battle of Bull Run. And a lot of that has to do with Stonewall Jackson's tactics and things that he did at the battle. I said Jackson and Lee were both very militarily intelligent. And that's one of the reasons they had so much success. Then they will defeat Ambrose Burnside at Fredericksburg. I thought that was going to pop up. I'll put it all up here. So they'll defeat Ambrose Burnside at Fredericksburg. And what term do you think we get from Ambrose Burnside? Famous hairdo today. I say it's famous now. It was a lot more famous back in the day, but when your hair goes down the side of your face here, your sideburns. That term comes from Ambrose Burnside because of the way he wore his beard and his hair, and you can see his crazy beard and the sideburns that he had, but we get that from him. Okay. One of the biggest victories for the South at this point in time was at the Battle of Chancellorsville. They will take on a Union army more than double its size, and they will defeat that Union army at Chancellorsville. But in all the fighting and turmoil, Robert E. Lee is actually going to lose Stonewall Jackson to friendly fire. The Jackson had been successful in forcing the Union army to retreat, and late in the evening, he goes out to kind of spy and scout out what the Union army is doing, where they're kind of setting up their camp, because the next day he's going to try to come around on their flank or their side and attack them from the side. So he goes out to try to see what they're doing. As he's coming back, it's dark. The Confederate soldiers don't know who it is. They call out to him. He doesn't hear them, and so they just start firing. Stonewall Jackson will be hit 3 times. One of those shots will hit him in the left arm and shatter his arm, which will have to be amputated because there's no way they could fix it. He will end up getting pneumonia, and he will die about a week later. Robert E. Lee actually wrote a letter to his wife saying, I hope he gets better. But I know he's lost his left arm, but I've lost my right arm. Basically saying that Stonewall Jackson is his right-hand man, and he needs him if they're going to defeat the Union Army. This was a huge blow to the Confederate forces by losing Jackson, because there's nobody that can really take his place. So that was a big hit for the Confederates by losing Stonewall. After the Battle of Chancellorsville, Lee decides that he's going to invade the North. Remember, they had always said they were going to sit back and be on the defensive. They were not going to go on the offensive. They're not going to attack the North. They're just going to sit back and make the North attack them. Well, here in mid-18 or kind of later 1862, he decides that he's going to go on the offensive. And he comes up with this plan to go into Maryland. He's going to divide his army into about 4 different parts. And each one of those parts was going to attack a different town there in Maryland. Well, it was doomed from the beginning because one of the Confederate generals, with his orders, ends up losing those orders, who are then discovered by Union forces. George McClellan, who we talked about a second ago, they now know what Lee's trying to do. They gather their forces. They're going to meet here at the Battle of Antietam, or as the North called it, the Battle of Sharpsburg, Maryland. Like I said, he leads his troops there on the offensive into Union territory. He thinks McClellan and his army are kind of reeling. They're sick. They're kind of licking their wounds. He thinks a victory in the North. Lee thinks a victory in the North is going to do a lot of success for the Confederates. So September 17th, 1862, the two sides will meet here at Sharpsburg, or at the Battle of Antietam. Antietam was a creek. That's why the South called it the Battle of Antietam. This is going to turn out to be the single bloodiest day of fighting during the Civil War. Over 6,000 dead, 17,000 wounded. So similar to the Battle of Shiloh, there's going to be over 23,000 casualties, but this is all going to take place in one single day. When the two forces meet, there's a cornfield there at Antietam, and basically both groups are on each side of the cornfield about 30 yards apart, just firing straight across at each other. The bloodiest part of the Battle of Antietam was the Battle of there was a road called the Sunken Road, and I'll show you some pictures here in just a second. But basically, both sides lined up on both sides of the road and are firing back and forth, muskets, cannons, and in a matter of hours, there's going to be over 5,000 casualties at the Sunken Road at this particular battle here at Antietam. There's the pictures of Sunken Road. It's so gory here at the Sunken Road. It actually receives the name the Bloody Lane. They say the blood was flowing up and down, not up and down, but flowing down this road here. So they gave it the nickname Bloody Lane rather than Sunken Road. But the Battle of Antietam, the single bloodiest day of fighting in the Civil War. Now, a little bit about McClellan here that we talked about. Lee will retreat here at Antietam, and he will suffer heavy casualties at the Battle of Antietam. Lincoln gets word to McClellan and basically tells him, "Hey, I want you to attack Lee's army. This is going to be a huge turning point. If you'll attack him, I really think you can defeat him, and maybe this war will end a little bit quicker." Well, McClellan is happy with just allowing Lee to retreat, and he doesn't attack Lee's army, and he just kind of lets him flee. Well, because he doesn't follow Lincoln's orders, he's going to be relieved of his duty in, I think, November of 1862. So McClellan will now be out as the leader of the Potomac. A few years later, he's actually going to run against Lincoln in the 1864 presidential election and doesn't even come close to winning. But that's another section. So, but had McClellan kind of followed Lee, kept attacking Lee, and defeated his army, the Civil War may have ended a little bit quicker than another 3 more years. But McClellan doesn't go on the offensive and just kind of lets Lee retreat. Excuse me. With the victory at Antietam, Lincoln had been looking for a major victory. He had already written what we know as the Emancipation Proclamation. But with all the losses at Fredericksburg, Second Battle of Bull Run, Chancellorsville, all those losses, he couldn't find a good time to issue this Emancipation Proclamation. So finally, with the victory at Sharpsburg or Antietam, he thinks this is the right time that he can now issue this Emancipation Proclamation. Remember, he does everything in his power to keep the border states. The border states had slaves. Okay, so the Emancipation Proclamation does not free all the slaves in America. Okay, what it does is that it frees all the slaves in the states at war with the Union. So all the states that had seceded, I think there's 11 of them, by issuing this Emancipation Proclamation, Lincoln's basically saying all those slaves are now free because you are at war with the Union. Well, obviously, those southern states don't agree to this, but by him doing that, one, he keeps the border states from seceding and joining the Confederacy because they get to keep their slaves for the time being. He's also hoping that by doing that, that France and Great Britain will see that he's freed these slaves, and that's going to hurt Southern cotton. And so hopefully they don't join on the side of the Confederacy as well, which is what the Confederacy wanted, was help from Europe. So September 22nd, Lincoln will issue the Emancipation Proclamation, freeing all the slaves in the southern states that have seceded. So, all right, so that's our notes on Section 2. I know it's kind of lengthy there. We got a couple more sections. There's actually 5 sections in this chapter, but we'll go over sections 4 and 5 together. So again, make sure you're getting these, write them down. Remember, your chapter 17 test is Friday, and then basically we'll be done. So get these notes, make sure you're getting them, and you'll have another section notes tomorrow.